Welcome to the Possibility Paradigm podcast, where we have conversations that are at the intersection of possibility, consciousness, actual experience, and energetic intelligence. The Possibility Paradigm are actually more than conversations. They're experiences that can change your tomorrows. It's such a unique infusion of energies that instigate, inspired, follow through for those of us on the planet who are definitely all about creating a better world. Let's jump into today's episode. What if the things that you think about yourself and you project onto yourself and you presume about yourself are actually just a story? They're just a collection of assumptions and judgments that you've made, and other people's opinions probably, that you've allowed to define you and what's possible for you. Welcome to the Possibility Paradigm, where we explore what happens when remarkable individuals step beyond these stories and self-projections and discover who they truly are. I'm Grace Ambrook, a host of the Possibility Paradigm, and I'm fascinated by one question. I'm fascinated by a whole lot of questions, but what becomes possible when we recognize ourselves as infinite beings, and infinite beings rather than the limited identities that we've been conditioned to accept? So the Possibility Paradigm exists for conscious business owners, for people who like to do from the woo-woo and who sense that there's more. There's more potential, more intuitive guidance, more connectivity, more contribution, more possibility than our logical minds and our rationale can actually grasp. And so in each of the episodes, we're going to explore transformations and things that happen when we actually allow ourselves to move beyond who we think we are and what we think we're capable of, and step into our greater potential and who we can actually truly be. And we all know that that will bring up stuff, right? And, so let's not kid ourselves there. And so today's overview, just an overview of today, is we're going to be diving into the foundation of all possibility rather than identity. And where it's like not the surface level identity of titles or roles or accomplishments, but how do we get to this deeper recognition of ourselves as an infinite being with boundless, unlimited potential? That's what I'm interested in, and that's what I know creates the greatest impact and contribution in people's lives, including my own. So by the end of this episode, I hope you'll begin questioning the boundaries and the limitations that you've accepted as reality, and get a glimpse of what's possible when you actually operate from your true infinite essence rather than your conditioned limitations. So I want to start with the identity, illusion. And so many years ago, when when the universe gave me like a substantial wedgie and basically said, oh, well, you might think that things are peachy and kind of going okay here, but you're not actually operating from the truth of who you are. And it was a very vulnerable moment, and it completely changed the direction of my life, both personally and professionally. And so within a period of a few months, the job that I was then working at and absolutely loved and was amazing disappeared. I no longer loved it and needed to extricate myself from there. And my 10-year relationship fell apart, and I had to leave the home that I just completely and utterly finished renovating. So those three kind of areas of stability all disappeared in a period of, months, because I might have been comfortable, but I was certainly not in my true potential. And it can be really challenging because we all understandably like a certain amount of comfort, but I can tell you life is far more interesting when you have discomfort and comfort running alongside each other. And so you've got to recognize patterns sometimes in our lives. And, when we create a challenge, we create a story about what it means. And then unconsciously, and I talk a lot about conscious choices, but unconsciously, then when we're wrapped up in the story, we organize our lives around that story, right? So that can look like something like a person or the entrepreneur who experienced rejection fairly early on and now has a very unconscious overworking capacity to actually prove their worth. It also looks like the intuitive who was told they were too sensitive. The one I got was like, oh, you're drawing a pretty long bow there, Grace. And then we learned to actually downplay and not communicate that incredibly contributive long bow, if you like, and that intuitive insight. And also, that being one of the greatest gifts. And so if you've suppressed your greatest gift, it's not going to happen, right? It's not going to feel good. That's an understatement. But we'll go into more of that as we go through. And then there might be some of you listening to this podcast who are actually visionaries, right? And being told to be more realistic. And one of my clients, we recently unraveled the patterning there of needing to be reasonable. And then, of course, if you're being reasonable, how do you actually free yourself up to articulate your boldest ideas and your biggest contribution? It's like, boo, boo, boo. And these patterns, when you recognize the patterns, they are so easy to move because all it is a pattern. It's not a reality. It was an event, not a reality. These were events that we've made realities. And as such, when we just, even in that dynamic shift, it's, oh my God, it was just one of these things that happened. Oh, it's not actually creating the rest of my reality. So in some of the upcoming conversations, I'll be talking with people and exploring how you do actually recognize and move beyond the intensity of your identities. So, for example, you might be identified as a marketing consultant. And that's a limitation in itself because really where the brilliance is, where the greatest contribution is in being an incredible, influential leadership of the leading edge of tomorrow thinking, right? But if you're a marketing consultant, can you really just feel into the difference in what you would choose if you're aware of that you're actually a very influential thinker on the leading edge of tomorrow's as opposed to a marketing consultant. It's a kind of different world, right? And what happens when you do actually realize your own value and bring in the different perspectives? So in future episodes, we'll be looking at some of these perspectives, some of these paradigms that hold us into limited identifications. And the other thing that I'm going to be exploring, which is really foundational to the work that I actually do with people, including, unveiling their missing pieces and unlocking the possibility of you, because in essence, the greatest possibility is you. You are the possibility, right? Yay! But we need to have a look at the energetic patterns. So what I find is that most of us navigate life through logical analysis or reason or rationale. We have been programmed heavily to do that. And we weigh up options and we consider the past and project into the future. But there is another intelligence available to us, and that is the ability to read the energy. And we all actually have it to varying degrees. It happens to be one of my gifts and my expertise. And to actually look into, to sense what's possible before there's any logical evidence, right? So There's actually a beautiful example of this is what was her name? I've forgotten her name. It'll come to me. But the documentary on the relationship between a man and an octopus. What was her name? Pippa Elridge, I think. I think it's Pippa Elridge. My apologies if that's not correct. If it isn't, I'll pop some notes in uh, the notes below the podcast and correct that if that's not right. But she took a really big detour in her professional path when she chose to make the film My Octopus Teacher, which went on to win an Academy Award and transformed, like, how have you ever watched it? It is extraordinary. It's one of my favorites, right? And transforming how we see our relationship with nature. And had she stuck to her logical analysis, she probably would have not done it, right? Because who would logically say that making a film about an octopus is going to change the direction of your life, right? You've got to be prepared to really embrace these crazy possibilities. And it takes courage and other things. But reading the energy makes those sorts of choices so much more available, and you become interactive with your own higher capacities of presence. So, now would be a good time to think about a time when you made a decision that kind of didn't make sense, but they at the same time felt impossible in some ways not to lean into, right? It can show up in places like, I know some of the people who I work with, and they're, hiring teams or hiring people, and they look at the resume, but the energy, which looks great on paper, but the energy's not right. And then they interview somebody and their energetics are like, woof, on fire, but there are some missing pieces. And, well, we all know, if you're listening to this, you know that if you go in with your logic, it doesn't, how did it turn out, right? But if you go with your intuition, what magic was within that? And it's not always smooth sailing, but when you operate beyond the limitations of logical identity and tap into that intuitive knowing, which is not knowledge. Knowing and knowledge are two entirely different things, and a sense of possibility. It's also important that when you're reading the energy, that no energy and nothing in the world is ever cast in stone, right? So everything is movable and changeable. But we begin to interact with another level of possibility that lights us up and creates greater possibility and creates an impact into the world, like that film. So, one of the fascinating aspects of moving yourself out of becoming an identity and becoming a possibility is that you can move energy very quickly and tune into the greater, and continuously tune in to the greater possibilities. And it can resolve like years of limitation, because it's just an energetic construct. That is probably an oversimplification, right? Well, it's not actually an oversimplification, but I've simplified it. And that's why when you're disassembling these patterns and moving out of energetic disruption and into infinite possibility creation, then, somebody it's good to have an outside assistance, I guess is what I'm saying, right? And so there are all sorts of people, and I'm sure you know them, and maybe you're in fact one of them. And if you are, I'd love to interview you on the podcast, who's shifted from, the corporate arena to a spiritual entrepreneur. And like, you could say chalk and cheese, and it's not actually something that you planned. My change was not something I planned. It took me, like, I had no idea. I wasn't, I mean, I was highly intuitive, but I wasn't tuned into my greater possibilities. I did not plan that kind of wake up call consciously. The truth is that it taught me, I don't want to go into the details of that too much, but there was so much of a gift in that took me quite a few years for me to actually bring that into my reality and live through it. But when we build up these constructs of who we are in limitation. And once you allow yourself to live and create your business from out of definition, but actually into possibility, then things shift very, very quickly. So let's actually do maybe like a simple exercise. If there's an area where either personally or in your business that you're feeling stuck, if you approach from rather than approaching it, how do I fix this problem and what's the solution? Maybe you could start playing in the energy of who would I be if this limitation didn't actually exist? Now, can you feel the energetic difference between those two questions? How do I fix this? It's like, it's wrong, for starters. And it's all your power goes to it, like the problem. But when you ask of yourself and the universe, who would I actually be if this limitation, was an illusion, didn't actually exist? If I dropped this story, who would I be? And because when you shift the energy and when you shift your perspective, you begin to create a new paradigm for yourself, which is the possibility paradigm. And this subtle shift, and they're so interesting because they're subtle, but they're profound, right? And that is totally a magic. Like, we have to think it has to be big, but and sometimes they are, but what I have experienced personally and in the mentoring that I do with people, it's around, wow, the slightest perspective, and things literally like the domino, right? They just go, which is why for subscribers to the podcast, I do have an amazing gift available for you. It's an ebook called Unveil Your Missing Piece and Unlock the Possibility of You. Really helps to shift perspective and move the energy so that you can become aware of your next possibility. And so I'll put the link to that below this podcast. But I want to take a breath for a second. So we've been conditioned. I like to also use the programming because I see it as the collective, to view limitation as it's almost like the limitation is, it's not going to comfort. It's more like reasonable, like it's justifiable, it's explainable. And so with all of those things, it's quite safe. And our conditioning says that possibility is risky. But what happens if it's actually the opposite? What if playing small, what if playing just as your humanness and not incorporating your infinite being, what if that playing small is actually the greatest risk we take? And a good out breath would be kind of amazing and wonderful here. So how do we actually apply this? So for conscious business owners, this distinction is crucial. It's like if you're operating from limitation, which means making decisions that are based on your current resources, your current knowledge, and market conditions, then that will feel very restrictive and contractive and uninvitational and unappealing, because you actually know that that's not what is possible for you. So you're bull-essing yourself. I haven't decided whether I'm going to swear in this podcast, because I swear quite a lot. Anyway, I haven't worked that out yet. And so operating from possibility means about making choices based on what wants to emerge through your business as a vehicle for transformation for both you and your clients, your guests, your whoever, right? So, operating from the possibility of the possibility paradigm means making choices based on what wants to emerge through this vehicle as a vehicle for transformation. And so are you operating from limitation and what's expected and what's reasonable, or are you operating from possibility, which requires different things from you and of you? So I'm not going to share the name yet, but one of the people I'm hoping to speak to in an upcoming episode will explore how she actually built a business around lunar manifestations, despite having no formal credentials and experience. So what allowed her to succeed in success is something we also explore in the possibility paradigm, because most people's perspective of success is way, way, way too small. But her willingness to operate from possibility rather than the limitation and that definition, and really embody and acknowledge and recognize herself as a channel rather than needing to be a source. Poof! Right? So if you're not the source of something, if you're the channel for something, I don't see lunar manifestation as anything particularly unusual, but perhaps some of you listening might. And it's not actually relevant, right? Because what is your possibility? This is this person's possibility. This is her contribution. What is your possibility? And if you're exploring and allowing and inviting and being that possibility, and you're connected to the infinite aspect of that, it's going to take off so much pressure from you. So much pressure. So today we've explored the foundation of the possibility, or one foundation, because I don't really have foundations in the possibility paradigm, but we've got to start somewhere, right? And every time I become aware of a new foundational energy to trampoline off, I will share it with you in the possibility paradigm. I do not hold back on those sharings. So today we've explored that possibility, and I want you just to recognize, well, you can do whatever you like, actually, but there's the opportunity for a recognition and an acknowledgement that you're an infinite being, but beyond your current perceptions. And we've distinguished between energetic reading and reasoning and logical and linearity. And if you're trying to, and that was one of the reasons why I was pushed out, is I was very linear. I was excellent at creating systems, excellent, very, very good. What the missing piece for me was in all those years ago, 30 odd years ago, was I didn't realize that those systems were purely and utterly and completely based on my intuitive knowing. They were not sourced from logic. They were sourced from source. But I didn't ever recognize it or value it. And so I kicked myself out, because I know that reading the energy and intuition are the keys to any change and any I'm not going to call it a construct, but any framework, right? Intuitively, you know this needs to go in here, and this needs to go in here, and this needs to go in here. But I come back to, so, today we've really begun to explore how this energetic reading and reasoning can start to play together, not be an either or. And we've examined how our shifting our identity into the humanness and to roles and into being an infinite being, how these subtle perspective shifts open up so much more possibility, and starting to reframe our perspective on limitation versus possibility. And this is just me talking with you. So imagine when we get some people together, and I've got some incredible questions that are actually activators as we go through. So they're kind of live activations with people who've walked this pathway. So as you move through your week, I really would encourage you to notice where you've been living from limitation rather than possibility. No judgment, right? Woohoo, out the door. We're going to talk about that much more. Awareness and acknowledgement gives you freedom. Judgment puts you in a prison. Please don't judge yourself. Please allow yourself to be aware of something. And then you can play with, is that a story or a limitation, or is that actually the essence of who I am? Or am I suppressing some essence? And what might become possible if you just start to question some of these assumptions, right? You just start to acknowledge it's like, oh, that's an assumption that I've kind of lived with unconsciously. What happens if I just question that? What if I just allow it to be different, right? What if you just allow it to be different? And, so just as a final reminder for today, it's like transformation isn't changing the circumstances. It's actually the recognition of how an infinite being that you already are, and what is accessible for you, available for you. That when you're looking to fix things, it doesn't even come into it's not on your radar, right? But when you recognize you're an infinite being, that you already won, things, perspectives, opportunities really begin to shift. So in our next episode, we're going to be building on this foundation, and we're going to be looking at energetic disruptions from patterns to possibilities. And we'll examine the method that I use of disrupting old energetic patterns. And equally important is about activating the new potentials. As we're moving into this, totally changing world, energetically, physically, on all levels, right? None of us are not aware of that one. But it's very interesting because energetically what is actually happening now is that the activation actually becomes the clearing. Not because we're in transition, it's not all the time. It depends how entrenched we are in the disruptive energy, in the limitation. But very often, more and more and more, and I've developed another capacity to actually find these activating potentials, working with the body and the infinite being and the energies, and then bringing all of that together and goes poof. But as I share more of that in our next episode, I'd like you to remember you are not who you think you are, and you are the possibility. Thank you so much for joining me on the Possibility Paradigm. If you've enjoyed this episode, and I'd love you to do a couple of things. I'd love to hear about your responses to what we've shared today. You can connect with me on Instagram or on Facebook, Grace Ambrook, and you can share your experiences there. And of course, please, I really encourage you also to have a look at Unveil Your Missing Piece unlock the possibilities of you. It's available. It's a gift. Gifting and receiving, gifting and receiving. And so I'd love to receive your interest from exploring that ebook. And the link to do that is below this podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.